Maya had just clocked off after a long, grueling 12-hour shift at the hospital. The last rays of the evening sun stretched across the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink as she stepped into the grocery store parking lot. She was exhausted, her feet ached, her back sore, but she had to stop by the store to grab a few essentials before heading home. All she wanted was to get inside her apartment, change into comfortable clothes, and get some much-needed rest. But fate, as usual, had other plans. She was just a few steps from her car when she heard the screech of tires on asphalt. The noise was sharp, unnerving. Maya turned quickly, instinctively bracing herself for what was about to happen. A white police car had come to a sudden stop behind her, its headlights blazing as the officer inside threw the car into park. Maya didn't recognize the officer, but his arrogant, puffed-up posture was enough to make her uneasy. He was stepping out of the car with an air of superiority, his face cold and hard, like he had already decided who she was without ever speaking to her. "Hey you, you're parked in a restricted area. Didn't you see the sign?" Maya looked over her shoulder at the spot where her car was parked. It was a small area, slightly off to the side near the edge of the lot, but there was no sign indicating that parking was prohibited. The space was empty, and she had parked there plenty of times before. But instead of getting defensive, Maya decided to stay calm. She wasn't in the mood for confrontation, especially not after such a long day. "I'm sorry, officer. I'll move it in just a moment." But Officer Graves wasn't having it. His face twisted into a sneer, his eyes narrowing as he took a few steps closer. Maya could feel his eyes scanning her from head to toe, as though she wasn't worth the respect of being looked at as an equal. She had seen it before, people like him, who believed their badge gave them power to treat others like dirt. She could feel the familiar weight of being judged simply for being who she was. "Oh, you'll move it, huh? You people always think you can do whatever you want, don't you?" Maya's jaw tightened at his words. Her patience was wearing thin, but she knew she had to remain in control. She had been dealing with disrespect her entire life, and she had learned long ago that people like him thrived on seeing others break. But Maya wasn't going to give him that satisfaction. Not today. It was just a mistake. "I'll fix it." Mistake? More like you don't know how to follow simple rules. Typical. Maya felt the sting of his words deep in her chest. She could tell by the way he said it, almost with a laugh, that he wasn't just annoyed. He felt entitled to make her feel small, like he could talk to her any way he wanted. It was something she had grown all too used to, but this time it hit different. She didn't know why, but today, Maya felt that familiar, suffocating feeling turn into something much stronger. Anger. It built slowly, simmering beneath her calm exterior. She had had enough. She wasn't going to let this officer treat her like she was beneath him. Maya glanced at her car, then back at Officer Graves. His smug expression was the last straw. Officer Graves took another step closer, his arms crossed and a smirk plastered on his face. The parking lot was nearly empty, save for a few other cars in the distance, but the oppressive silence made it feel like Maya was on display, and Officer Graves was the judge, jury, and executioner. "You know, this area's for the employees of the store. People like you shouldn't be parking here. You probably don't even know the rules. You just think you can get away with whatever you want, don't you?" Maya's heart began to race. The nerve of this man. She wanted to say something, to snap back, but she held herself in check. It wasn't worth it. Not yet. She had been in situations like this before, too many times, and she had learned the hard way that people like Officer Graves would only try harder to push you down the more you resisted. But today she didn't care about the usual play nice strategy. She wasn't some random person. She had earned her place in this world, and she wasn't going to let some cop make her feel otherwise. "I can move my car, but I don't think you have the right to talk to me like this." The officer's face changed, though only slightly. He stopped leaning over her and straightened up, his smirk still hanging on his lips. But his eyes flickered for a second. Something shifted. Maybe he saw the determination in her eyes. Maybe he realized for just a moment that he wasn't dealing with someone who was easily intimidated. "Oh yeah. And what makes you think I don't have the right to talk to you like that? You look like the type who needs a little discipline." At that moment, Maya snapped. It wasn't just the way he was treating her. It was the way he was assuming he could treat everyone like this. His racism, his condescension, it was all too much. She reached into her bag, not caring if he noticed. Slowly, carefully, she pulled out her military ID and held it up for him to see. Officer Graves froze. The power in Maya's hand felt heavier than it ever had before. It wasn't just an ID. It was a symbol of everything she had worked for, everything she had earned. She wasn't the scared woman he thought she was. She wasn't some random person in his eyes. She held the ID up, making sure he saw it clearly. I'm an officer in the U.S. Army. I've served for 6 years. I've earned my rank. I didn't get it handed to me like some people who hide behind their badges. So before you start assuming anything about me, you should know who you're talking to. For a split second, Officer Graves didn't speak. His face turned pale, his mouth opening and closing as he tried to process what he had just heard. He wasn't expecting this. He wasn't expecting her to be an Army officer, let alone a woman of color, and the shift in his demeanor was undeniable. The bravado he had earlier, that smug look, melted away like ice in the sun. Wait, you're in the military. Maya didn't respond right away. She just stood there, waiting for him to put it together. This was the moment. This was the moment where he realized the truth, that Maya wasn't the person he had assumed she was, that she was someone who had fought for her country, earned respect, and demanded equality. Maya stepped forward, her voice stronger now, more assertive than it had ever been before. She was done being quiet. She wasn't here to prove herself to him or anyone else. She was here to demand the respect she had earned. You thought I was just another person you could push around because of the way I look. But you were wrong. I'm not here to be judged by you or anyone else. I've been through enough to know how to stand tall when people like you try to break me down. But I'm not going to let that happen today. Officer Graves stood still, looking like a deer caught in the headlights. He had no words left, no defense. He had underestimated her, and now he had to face the consequences of his assumptions. Next time you want to judge someone, remember who you're talking to. I've worked too hard for my place to let you take it from me with just a few words. She turned and walked towards her car, the air between them thick with silence. Officer Graves didn't stop her. He didn't even try to speak. He just watched as she drove off, leaving him in the parking lot, alone with his shattered arrogance. As Maya drove away, a sense of peace washed over her. She had done it. She had stood up for herself when it mattered most. She had faced a man who thought he could push her down, and she had turned the tables on him with nothing but her truth. She didn't need his approval, and she wasn't waiting for it. But as she drove down the road, her heart still racing, something felt off. It wasn't over yet. She glanced in her rearview mirror. A dark car had started following her, staying much too close for comfort. Her pulse quickened. Who was it? And why were they following her? Maya's hands tightened on the steering wheel as she glanced once again at her rearview mirror. The car behind her was still there, a dark silhouette against the dim streetlights. It had been tailing her for the past few miles, and despite trying to shake it off, the car seemed determined to stay close. She tried to stay calm, telling herself it was probably just a coincidence. Maybe it was someone driving home. Maybe they were just heading the same way. But the more she thought about it, the more uneasy she became. It wasn't normal to be followed like this, especially after everything that had just happened with Officer Graves. Was this some kind of revenge, or was it something more sinister? Maya's breath grew shallow. She wasn't the kind of woman to panic, but her instincts told her something wasn't right. She had been in tense situations before during her time in the military, and something about this felt off. She had to act, but she didn't want to give away any signs of fear. She reached for her phone, fingers shaking as she dialed a number she knew by heart, her brother, Mark. Hey, Mark. Someone's following me. Can you track me on the app? I need you to stay on the phone with me. Her brother's voice came through instantly, calm and reassuring. I've got you, Maya. Just stay cool. Where are you? I'll keep an eye on the location. As she continued to drive, the car behind her stayed on her tail, never speeding up or slowing down, just keeping a steady distance. Maya's grip on the wheel tightened as the streets grew quieter. She was getting closer to home, but she didn't feel safe yet. Mark, I'm on Oak Avenue now. The car's still there. It hasn't moved. All right, I'm tracking you. Stay calm, Maya. You've got this. Her heart raced faster now, adrenaline pumping through her veins as she tried to keep her cool. She glanced back at the car again. It was still there. And then, without warning, the car made a sudden move. It swerved sharply and sped up, cutting off her path. Maya's breath caught in her throat. She slammed on the brakes, narrowly avoiding a collision. The car screeched to a halt right in front of her, blocking her way completely. Maya's heart pounded as the reality of the situation hit her. This wasn't just some random person on the road anymore. This was an intentional act. She was being targeted. Eyes wide, her voice shaky but determined. "Mark, they've stopped me. I'm at Oak and 15th. Get here now. Call the cops." She could feel the panic rising, but she shoved it down, focusing on the situation at hand. She wasn't alone in this. She wasn't going to let fear control her. The door to the car in front of her opened, and a tall figure stepped out. Maya's eyes narrowed as she tried to make out the figure's face in the dim light. The man was wearing a jacket that seemed too familiar. It was Officer Graves. The realization hit her like a punch to the stomach. No way. Officer Graves took a step toward her car, his face still holding that smug, arrogant expression. This time it wasn't just about a parking ticket. This time it was something much darker. "I bet you thought you were so clever, didn't you? Showing me that little military ID. But you can't run away from the system that easily." Maya's heart skipped a beat. He had followed her. He had intentionally blocked her path, and now here he was, confronting her once again. It was as if he hadn't learned anything from the last encounter. Maya's fist clenched in anger, but she knew she had to keep her cool. "What do you want, Graves? I want you to know that you're not untouchable. You think because you've got some military rank, you can walk around and talk to people however you want. You think you can just step into my territory and make me look like a fool." Maya's grip on the steering wheel tightened again. She wasn't about to let him intimidate her, not after everything she had been through. She had fought too hard to let him have the upper hand again. "You don't scare me. I'm not the one who's in the wrong here, Graves. You are. You've been using your badge to hurt people, to belittle them. But you're wrong about me. You were wrong then, and you're wrong now." She could see his face redden with anger, his fist clenching as he took another step toward her car. This time, however, Maya was ready. "If you think I'm going to let you get away with this, you're mistaken. You followed me. You blocked my path. This isn't about a parking ticket anymore. This is about you abusing your power. You're going to answer for it." For the first time, Officer Graves hesitated. The confident, arrogant expression he wore started to crack. He didn't expect her to fight back. He didn't expect her to stand her ground. But Maya wasn't done. Not yet. Not by a long shot. Maya's phone buzzed in her pocket. It was her brother, Mark. "Maya, I've called the cops. Help is on the way. Just hold on a little longer. Don't engage him directly. I'm not backing down." Not this time. She wasn't going to let Officer Graves intimidate her or anyone else like him. She knew that now was the time to fight back, maybe not with fists, but with truth. She had to stand firm, not just for herself, but for everyone who had been treated unfairly by people in positions of power. "You've made a mistake, Graves. I'm not the one who needs to be afraid here. You're the one who's in the wrong, and you'll answer for it. Mark my words." Officer Graves stood still for a moment, seemingly unsure of what to do. The tension between them was unbearable, the silence stretching out into the night. Maya's breath was shallow, her eyes locked on him as she waited for his next move. Suddenly, the sound of sirens cut through the air, growing louder by the second. Officer Graves turned, his face filled with panic as he realized the situation was no longer in his control. Just as the sirens reached their peak, Officer Graves cursed under his breath and took a step back. But Maya wasn't going to let him escape that easily. The officers who pulled up were nothing like Graves. They had no interest in making excuses. As the cops approached, Officer Graves quickly turned to leave, but one of the officers stepped forward, grabbing his arm. "This isn't what it looks like. I will take it from here. Come with us, Graves." The truth was unraveling. The power balance was shifting. Maya felt a wave of relief, but her fight wasn't over yet. She had faced down an officer who thought he could control her, and now the system had finally taken notice. She wasn't just a civilian. She was someone who had earned the right to stand up for herself, and now everyone would see that. But just as she thought the battle was won, Maya noticed something that made her heart skip. There was someone watching them from a nearby alley. Their face was hidden, but their presence felt far too familiar. Was it another officer, or someone else entirely? As the sirens faded and Officer Graves was led away, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that the danger wasn't over. Who was watching her now? What did they want? And why did it feel like this battle was far from finished? The last of the sirens echoed into the night as Officer Graves was led away, his hands cuffed and his head hanging low. Maya watched as the other officers took control of the situation, but her heart still raced with uncertainty. She had won, Graves had been caught, but something about the way the scene unfolded still didn't sit right with her. Her eyes flickered toward the alley just across the street. It was dark, but her instincts told her someone was there. She couldn't make out their face, but she could feel the weight of their stare on her, like they were watching her every move. Whoever it was, they weren't trying to hide. They were waiting. She stepped forward, her hand instinctively resting on the door handle of her car, but before she could make a move, a voice called out from the shadows. "You shouldn't have done that." Maya froze. The voice wasn't familiar, but it carried a weight of danger. She didn't move, keeping her gaze fixed on the dark figure in the alley. It was hard to make out any details, but something about the way they stood made her feel uneasy. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. "Who are you?" The figure stepped forward, revealing a man dressed in dark clothes, his face obscured by the hood of his jacket. As he moved closer, the light caught his face for just a moment, and Maya's stomach dropped. She didn't recognize him, but she recognized the look. The same look she had seen in other situations, people trying to control others. People who felt threatened by someone standing up for themselves. "I'm done backing down. You want something from me, you better make it clear." The man stopped just a few feet away, his gaze cold and calculating. He didn't respond right away, but the tension in the air thickened, the weight of the moment growing heavier. Maya's pulse quickened, and she could feel her military training kicking in. She had been in dangerous situations before, but this felt different. This felt like someone was trying to push her into a corner. "You're more trouble than you think you are, but it's not over." "Not yet." Maya's heart raced as the man's words sank in. She had thought Graves was the end of the line, but now it seemed like a whole new set of problems had just begun. Before Maya could respond, she heard the sound of footsteps behind her. Turning quickly, she saw two more officers approaching, their faces stern and serious. One of them was the same officer who had been with the other cops when they arrived. His gaze was focused on the man in the alley. "Hey, step away from her. Now." The man in the alley turned toward the officers, his expression unreadable. There was a moment of tense silence before he threw his hands up in mock surrender. "I'm just here to deliver a message. Seems like your little friend here made some powerful enemies." Maya's mind raced. Powerful enemies. What was he talking about? Her body tensed as she watched the exchange between the officers and the man. This was no random encounter. The situation was much deeper than it appeared. She had no idea who this man was, but she knew now that Officer Graves wasn't just a rogue cop. He was part of something much bigger, a network of corruption that extended far beyond a simple parking ticket. "You're under arrest for harassment and obstruction of justice. You'll be talking to us at the station." The man didn't resist as the officers cuffed him, but Maya could feel the weight of his words still hanging in the air. She had just uncovered something bigger, something that could cost her more than just her job. Her life might be on the line now, and she knew she couldn't let up. She needed answers. As the man was taken away, Maya's gaze locked on the officer who had spoken to him. She needed to know what was going on. "What is this? Who was he? What do you mean by enemies?" The officer sighed, glancing at Maya with a mix of sympathy and caution. "It's bigger than you think. Graves was part of a network. Corruption runs deep within this department. He wasn't just harassing you because of a parking ticket. He was sent to intimidate you because you uncovered something. You've got enemies now, real ones." Maya's mind spun. Graves wasn't just some arrogant cop. He was a cog in a machine she had just become tangled in. She had never expected her fight for justice to take this kind of turn, but she wasn't going to back down now. Not after everything she had fought for. With the officers taking the man away, Maya finally felt a brief sense of relief. She had stood her ground, uncovered the truth, and now the pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place. The corruption she had exposed was only the beginning, and she knew that her fight was far from over. But just as she thought she could breathe again, the officer who had spoken earlier approached her. "We'll make sure the truth comes out. Graves will face the consequences of his actions, and so will anyone else involved. You've done something many wouldn't have the courage to do. You'll be okay." Maya nodded, but she knew the road ahead would be hard. The fight wasn't over. She had opened a door to something bigger, and now it was time to see it through. But one thing was clear: she wasn't alone anymore. She had allies, people who were willing to stand with her, and that made all the difference. As she watched the officers drive away, taking the man into custody, Maya's thoughts turned inward. She had proved her worth not just to Officer Graves, but to herself. She had stood tall, fought back, and exposed the truth. But most importantly, she had refused to let anyone define her. "This is just the beginning. I won't stop until every piece of the truth comes to light. Maya had faced one of the hardest challenges of her life and had come out on top. The corruption within the system was far from over, but she had made a difference. For every person who had been overlooked, underestimated, or silenced, she had stood up and spoken her truth. And though the road ahead was uncertain, Maya knew one thing for sure. Justice wasn't just something that happened in courtrooms. It was something you had to fight for. And with her military training, her determination, and the truth on her side, she was ready to keep fighting. If you've ever faced injustice or been underestimated, remember your voice matters. Never back down. Share this story, and let's make sure the truth is heard. Stand up for what's right. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more unbelievable stories that prove anything is possible when you believe in yourself.